Hello, everyone. This is Bevan Croft, co-director of the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. We will give folks another minute to gather, and once it seems we've reached critical mass, we will get started. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Bevan Croft. I co-direct the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems with my colleague, Alex Bernardi, who is also here. We're glad that you've joined us today to learn about the first NCAPPS Technical Assistance cohort. A quick description of myself. I'm a white woman. I have blonde hair, pulled back. I'm wearing a striped summer shirt, and I'm in a room with some pretty bright colors on the walls. This webinar series is a monthly webinar by NCAPPS, and we're glad to be funded by the Administration for Community Living and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. All NCAPPS webinars are free and open to the public. A few logistics about the day. First, before I go into logistics, we exist as a center to promote systems change that makes person-centered principles not just an aspiration, but a reality in the lives of people across the lifespan. And that really is what we're going to be taking a deep dive into today. Now, a couple of logistic points to make before we get started. This is a webinar format, so everyone is muted. You're more than welcome to use the chat feature to say hello and to engage with everyone. If you are interested in engaging with your fellow participants, be sure to select all panelists and attendees in the to bar of the chat so that your comment or your question is visible to everyone, accessible to everyone. And it's always great to see dialogue and information being shared in the chat. We'll have a little time for questions and answers at the end of this webinar. But if we can't get to all questions, we will also post responses to the questions on our website after the fact. This webinar is being live captioned in English and Spanish. There is a link to access both the English and Spanish transcripts. You can see the link on the screen, but it is also the live link can be found in the chat box. Connor just pasted it in. We'll have a couple polls for this webinar, so please be prepared to interact when we pull those up. You're more than welcome to get in touch with us at any time. We're always glad to hear feedback. You can email us at ncapps at hsri.org. That's HSRI, Human Services Research Institute. Just so you know, a recording of this webinar, a PDF version of the slides, a plain language summary of the webinar, and answers to any questions that we don't get to will be posted on our website, ncapps.acl.gov. You can go to that next slide, Connor. Yeah. All right, so let's do a poll. We'd like to see who is here. There are about 240 folks on today. So if you could please pull up the poll, Connor. Please let us know what roles you self-identify with. You are welcome to select Any that apply, and they are a person with a disability or a person who uses long-term services and supports, a family member or a friend of somebody who uses long-term services and supports, self-advocate, advocate, peer specialist, peer mentor, social worker, counselor, care manager, a researcher or analyst, a service provider organization employee, or a government employee. So please take a moment to fill out this poll. We'll give folks about another 10 seconds. Okay, let's see. All right, so over half of you are government employees. So welcome. And we have a good number of social workers, counselors and care managers, service providers, a handful of researchers, peer specialists, and also some self-advocates, advocates, people with disabilities and family members with disabilities. So everyone is represented here. Thank you for sharing and responding. It's always good to know who we're in community with today. All of the above. I like that. I like that, Raimi. You're a jack of all trades. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a moment. And the reason that we're having this webinar is because we really think it's time to showcase the amazing work that the states who are receiving NCAPPS Technical Assistance have been engaged in. We're wrapping up the final year of a 3-year technical assistance period. There are 15 states that have been working closely with NCAPPS, with our subject matter experts, to engage in specific systems change goals all around implementing person-centered practices. So we're taking this webinar as an opportunity to showcase that work. But we're also going to spend some time really looking at the how and why of person-centered systems change. What does it look like? Why is it important? What are the common opportunities for change? Where are their sticking points? Hopefully we'll have a rich discussion. We'll have representatives from 4 of the 15 NCAPPS states share their efforts and provide us with kind of an overview. And then we've invited 2 leaders within those states who have lived experience of receiving supports in long-term service and support systems, who are going to offer their reflections from the perspective of their lived experience and their experience as leaders within their states. And then they're going to engage all 4 of the panelists in a facilitated discussion to really to dig a little deeper into these topics. So that's what's on order for the next 90 minutes. And one other piece to just mention is that we are about to launch, actually have just launched, the application for the next cohort of NCAPPS Technical Assistance. So if you're interested in applying for that technical assistance, we'll have the link to the application here that you can go ahead and download, and you can get a good flavor for the types of things that you could potentially pursue. That 58% of you who are government employees, you are eligible, or you are representing an entity that is eligible to apply for NCAPPS Technical Assistance. So we hope that you come away inspired to engage in systems change activities of your own. So let's get started. We're going to start by hearing from Patricia Richardson. She is the statewide Aging and Disability Resource Coordinator for the Connecticut Department of Aging and Disability Services, which is the state unit on aging in Connecticut. Patricia has been involved in the No Wrong Door system, and she's also the NCAPPS Technical Assistance Lead. So Patty, I'd like to invite you to share with us what you've been up to in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Bevan. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you what Connecticut has been doing with the NCAPPS Technical Assistance project. So I am white, 61-year-old female wearing a pink blouse. I have dark hair. The assistance came for Connecticut at a very key strategic time. We happen to have met as a state agency in February 1st, 2019, to discuss person-centered thinking in our state. And you can advance the next slide. And at that point in time, in February 1st, 2019, we became aware of the NCAPPS opportunity. And at that meeting, we decided as a state to go forward with technical assistance with the Department of Aging and Disability Services taking the lead. And you can advance to the next slide. So Connecticut was interested in technical assistance for a variety of reasons. At least 7 different state agencies in educational settings in Connecticut were offering a variety of different person-centered thinking and training curriculum. And none of us knew each other's curriculum to evaluate whether it made sense for us to be offering that many trainings. We weren't in a position to compare the effectiveness of any of the trainings. And we realized having different curriculum might result in really inconsistency for persons receiving person-centered planning throughout their life cycle, that different tools are being used, the approaches might be different. And equally, staff moving from one state agency to the other had to retake training since there was no cooperative agreement amongst the state agencies that their training met the others' standards. So it really didn't make sense for state agencies to be investing financially in so many different curriculum. And we felt it was important to relook at this for sustainability reasons. Since every agency had a significant financial and emotional investment in the training curriculum, we welcomed and felt it was really helpful to have technical assistance from an impartial third party to realize to be able to reevaluate all of the curriculums as we move forward. And you can advance to the next slide. As noted, the agencies here offered all different types of person-centered training curriculum. Some offered multiple trainings. For example, the Department of Developmental Services offered Charting the Life course and also the No Wrong Door person-centered training. The types of curriculum that we were offering in our state included the Boston CADAR, Renew, MAPS, Paths, the No Wrong Door person-centered thinking, person-centered recovery planning, and family-focused training. It can go to the next slide. So Connecticut wrote a technical assistance plan that was approved, and we sought to develop a number of key stakeholders representing a variety of people from a cross-section of lived experience that would be inclusive of older adults, persons in recovery, persons who had acquired brain injuries, intellectual developmental disabilities, and parents of children within the school system that would help us to inform the process. And we met on a quarterly basis. You can go to the next slide. So our goal was to either really to develop a core competencies and then develop quality standards and to improve our connection with individuals with lived experience. And ultimately, I think our goal was to see whether we could agree on 1 or 2 curriculums, or in the absence of that, if we could recognize each other's curriculum and to add any components of the other curriculum that might help to serve individuals better. And we plan to do that by comparing the curriculum so that we could come to established core competencies between the trainings and to develop any understanding of how different tools or aspects of training might have stronger elements that one or the other agencies might adopt. So the next goal was to develop quality standards to determine if, in fact, the planning process and the training that we were conducting was actually being person-centered for the individuals that were receiving services, so that we could improve person-centered thinking and principles in our state. And we were interested to hear from persons with lived experience to get their feedback on what that experience looked like, to see if any educational materials might be needed to better inform them. And then if that was the case, how to share that information. Go ahead to the next slide. So all the agencies recognize that training is indeed a process, and most of them struggled with ensuring that the person-centered systems were changing as a result of their training. So after the completion of training, we recognized that sometimes the tendency was for staff to return to prior practice. So we all were interested in seeing how we could improve what we were doing. Go on to the next slide. Our core team actually was larger than was recommended by NCAPPS, but we had so many agencies invested in person-centered curriculum, we really needed to include all of the agencies that are listed here. And we did experience some transition. So over the course of 3 years, we had a considerable number of people who retired and others that had changes of responsibility. So the list here is actually not the current list that's we have as a core team. You can go to the next slide. So the core team met with NCAPPS for technical assistance on a monthly basis. And our first step, as I indicated, was to compile and forward all of the curriculum content along with any evaluations of that curriculum to our subject matter expert, who is Jonas Schwartz, that was assigned to us from NCAPPS. And then Jonas Schwartz and the NCAPPS team during the pandemic, when some of the work was on hold, helped to look at that at the curriculum and to develop a crosswalk to develop and identify 5 domains that were common amongst all the curricula. And that is material that you can review. You can go to the next slide. So along the way, we shared our goals and progress with our stakeholder group that met quarterly. And we discovered in the 3rd year, where we had some core group members participating in group technical assistance to develop quality metrics, that our state did not have a common definition of person-centered planning. So we had a subgroup that met to come to a common agreement and presented that to the stakeholder group, and clearly the stakeholder group felt that it was not sufficient enough in plain language. So that's still something that we're in process of developing a final definition. You can go into the next slide. In year 2 and 3, we set out to conduct listening sessions to ask individuals with lived experience what they knew about person-centered planning. And the stakeholder group was extremely helpful in locating existing groups that we could meet with who could host listening sessions, helping to connect with those groups, encouraging others to participate, and ensuring that we were actually asking the right questions. Each listening session was held with 2 members of the core team, one usually familiar with the group that we were meeting with, and the other to record sessions. You can go on to the next slide. At the start of each listening session, we provided a brief overview of what person-centered planning should be looking like, since some people may not actually be experiencing that. And then we asked those with lived experience what they knew about their planning process, whether there were tools that helped prepare them for that. Did they think information might be helpful in the absence of that? And if so, what type of education did they feel they needed, and how would they like to get that content? You can go on to the next slide. So we're still in that process of completing this phase. We are going to be compiling a survey that is going to be disseminated for those who did not attend listening sessions. And our next steps then would be to develop the educational tools that the persons with lived experience indicated are needed, and to develop an outreach plan so that we can reach those individuals with those materials. As I indicated earlier, a small group of the core team participated in the group technical assistance. The webinars and sessions were extremely helpful, and our goal is to develop 4 to 5 quality metrics that all the state agencies that you saw earlier could collect so that we could come to some agreement of quality standards. And our subject matter expert, Jonas Schwartz, is going to be reviewing samples of person-centered plans from the state agencies that are doing Medicaid, providing Medicaid services, so that we can get good feedback on the current status of those plans. So I thank you. That pretty much was what we were doing in Connecticut. We have found it very helpful. And as I said, it is a process. So I thank you for the opportunity to share what we've been doing in Connecticut.
Thank you, Patricia. And I did share a few resources that sort of, this is Bevan, that sprung to mind as Patricia was speaking, and I'm sure I'll continue to drop resources into chat. Next, we're going to hear from Tom Snyder. He is the Aging Services Coordinator at the Georgia Division of Aging Services with responsibility for community-based case management, grant writing, program performance measurements. He leads the Caregiver Specialist Program. He's the Senior Community Service Employment Program Coordinator and the Evidence-Based Services Program Coordinator. And he's also the Division Liaison for Coordinated Transportation and Behavioral Health, in addition to being the NCAPPS Technical Assistance Lead for the state of Georgia. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Bevan, and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Georgia. And thank you, Patricia, for sharing the great work that you all are doing in Connecticut. I'm pleased to share with you some of the work that we've been doing in Georgia around person-centered planning. And Connor, if you'll go to the next slide, and actually we'll skip that one. So Georgia was very fortunate in that we had multiple partnerships and collaborations that were already underway when word of the NCAPPS opportunity came to us. And so, for example, Georgia has worked for several years to develop a no wrong door system of care across aging, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, behavioral health, developmental disabilities, adult protective services, and a variety of other partners. We also have a very solid coalition on older adults and behavioral health that's been working over several years to strengthen coordination among behavioral health and aging networks, and has facilitated statewide planning to improve access to behavioral health services. And the Georgia Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorder, or GARD as we call it, state plan was approved by our legislator and works across numerous systems to improve screening, diagnosis, and service coordination on behalf of families that are impacted by dementias. So these various systems had been working to include person-centered principles throughout our policy, training, and practice efforts. So when we learned of the NCAPPS grant, we recognized that the support would help us synthesize these efforts in a coordinated way. What we found was that each of us were using person-centered jargon, but often we didn't know what each other meant by it, and sometimes didn't know what our own partners meant by it. So we found that this integration of a person-centered philosophy into all of our networks was imperative to building a true no wrong door system. Okay, next slide, please. So our partners had recognized several demographic shifts that impacted our work and facilitated the need to enhance this collaboration. And so people with disabilities and or behavioral health conditions were living longer, entering the aging network that we didn't feel necessarily competent to work with. Persons with behavioral health issues were living longer and often developing symptoms of cognitive impairment, and those two systems were not real comfortable working with. And then we were also seeing where older adults were experiencing behavioral health and substance abuse symptoms at higher rates, or we were just becoming more aware of it and learned how to screen them better. So these things kind of met at a really good time to facilitate us working in this area. Next slide, please. So our team included several sections from our Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities that included adult mental health, recovery transformation, cultural and linguistic competence, the Division of Developmental Disabilities. We had two sections from our Division of Aging represented. We had representatives from two of our area agencies on aging. We had someone from our Elderly and Disabled Waiver Program, the Carter Center Mental Health Program, and the Emory Fuqua Center for Late Life Depression. And then we built around that several affiliated partners, such as the Georgia Advocacy Office, the Brain Injury Association, Centers for Independent Living, and some other partners. Next slide, please. So we divided our project into 3 components with the goal of doing 1 per year. And so year 1 was to look across all of our systems and come up with a common operational definition of person-centered practice. And the technical support team for NCAPPS was really critical and did an environmental scan of some common definitions, and that was really, really helpful for us. So we developed a common definition that we could use across systems. Year 2, our goal was to establish objective measures by which each partner and our system as a whole could evaluate both quantitatively and qualitatively the extent to which we were being person-centered. And so the definition and metrics will provide the foundation for our updates to policy for consistency in training and technical assistance across our networks. And year 3, which will be starting soon, is focusing on ensuring that strategies for standards, training, and staff competence are consistent across all of our systems. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, year 1 focused on our common definition, and we came up with 4 key components that sort of anchored our definition. So the first is a holistic approach that acknowledges that families are the experts in their own lives, and an approach that centers on that person and family and explicitly includes their strengths, interests, values, and that is trauma-informed and culturally aware. We also felt like we wanted to have a flexible and collaborative plans of care that defines all the roles of all the members of the support team, that allow for multiple pathways of success, and that also account for and help overcome challenges. And that includes the concept of multiple pathways, both clinical and non-clinical. The third component of our definition focuses on intentional conversations that encourage individual and families to dream and explore possible futures, and that build their resilience. And the last was to develop a system of care that ensures that the individual and families have maximum access to all of the benefits of living in the community so that they can achieve their desired outcomes. The next slide, please. Year 2 focused on identifying indicators, and again, the NCAPPS team was extremely helpful in doing an environmental scan to find out what was out there, both externally and internally. The driving principle for this work was that we wanted to use existing evaluation data points wherever possible, and for each partner to use data points that were meaningful for them. So what we end up with is each partner has a set of indicators that lead back to those 4 core statements of our definition. We'll be able to analyze those both as agencies and across agencies as a system to identify best practices and to inform each other of what works and what doesn't work as far as these measures. Next slide, please. So our next steps are to continue to gather feedback on our definition from the community. We see that as an ongoing issue and an ongoing opportunity. We want to gather enough data to begin to evaluate our indicators, which may lead to changes in either our definition or our indicators. There's an ongoing challenge of retaining buy-in from leadership. We anticipate that happening through periodic updates on our progress, both to internal and external stakeholders. We're going to be working over the next year to develop an ongoing evaluation plan Tentative, that looks like our core team will meet every 6 months to evaluate data and recommend changes to our process. In year 3, we are in the process of drafting an environmental scan for current training across all of our partners agencies. And then we've identified the need to also look at expanding consumer direction or self-direction in our different systems, and also start to look at issues around direct care workforce shortages. So that's an overview of what we're doing here in Georgia. And we appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Next, we are headed west to Texas to hear from Mary Bishop, who believes that her social work, every social work position in her career has prepared her to be the Texas Health and Human Services Person-Centered Practices team lead. She's partnered with people living in intermediate care facilities, directed to children's shelter, nursing communities, hospice, home health, and supported elders needing behavioral health supports. She's owned a social service agency and has worked with the state of Texas in various rights and advocacy roles for over 20 years. Mary.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Bevan. It's an honor to be here today, so thank you very much, NCAPPS, not just for having us here, but for having Texas involved and selecting us as part of this fantastic opportunity. I consider myself having long brown and graying hair. Clearly someone who's been here 20 years plus, and all the other experiences, I've been around for a little while. So the rest of the story is that I recognize myself as a human being. I consider my labels as she, her, and hers. And I'm wearing a white blouse with some orange and yellow flowers. And the room I'm in is not as bright and cheery as Bevan's is, because I'm in a hotel, so I've got neutral colors. The very first thing that we did to begin our journey, other than our application, was to identify the need for a strategic planning committee to help guide us to direct our path in becoming a more person-centered organization and system. Originally, we established the work group for this strategic planning committee that had 6 additional work groups. This entire committee originally was about 95 people from various places, from managed care organizations, both public and private providers, people, of course, with lived experience and their family members, as well as the Texas Workforce Commission, just to name a few. The very first strategic, I forgot to tell you to advance the slide, so I apologize. The very first strategic planning work group that we developed was called Parallel Tracks and Trauma-Informed Person-Centered Practices in Texas. And basically what this work group originally developed was our vision and mission for our strategic plan. That Health and Human Services system puts the person first. We help the people we support achieve purpose, meaning, and well-being as they define it. The mission is to incorporate person-centered thinking, planning, and practices into the Health and Human Services system to help achieve and sustain this vision. The next thing that we did was the Oversight and Rules Change Work Group. They did a phenomenal job of doing a person-centered environmental scan. It was updated to include the Texas Workforce Commission's efforts. And then it also included the third update, Texas statutes, contracts, and manuals. Next slide, please. We then decided, are we walking the walk or just talking the talk? And so we developed the outward facing work group, which included taking a look at our branding guide, our website, our memos, our contracts, and other internal documents to become person-centered. But this team didn't stop there. They moved on and developed an organizational survey to identify what areas within the agency still don't even know what person-centered practices is. And so that survey went out last week through our human resources team newsletter to all managers and above. And to follow up with the findings after we determine who needs that additional support to become more person-centered, we have posters ready in hand to be able to help those teams develop their own plan to become more person-centered. This team also provided us with the thoughts of having a person-centered thinking training video that could be used to help people become more person-centered. That included not just employees, but definitely people who have lived experience. The most recent thing that this team was able to accomplish was helping the Human Resources Department identifying the need to have a shared point folder for the new employee training on person-centered practices. We're very excited for the work that they're doing. The other work group that's really moving forward with identifying how to measure the quality and oversight of what people need to have better lives, not just better paper, that to assure that people have their desired life choices, their self-determination, and their desired outcomes, is happening with, again, the assistance of Dr. Janice Tondura. And she's working with some of our top leaders within the agency to come together to identify what questions need to be asked in a survey to truly work with the very top policy development person for each of the 5 the deputy executive commissioners and their measurement person, whoever their analyst is, to really come together to figure out how do we measure, not in silos, the success of person-centered, but collectively as an agency. And then it'll come back to this quality and oversight work group, and they will provide us guidance to help us make sure we're using the core indicators and the survey results. Next slide, please. When we move forward, you can't move forward to help people have the lives that they choose without including what they're doing throughout their day. So the next work group we named Employment and Meaningful Day. You notice there's an asterisk. That's to definitely indicate that that person determines what their day is, not the rest of us. So when you take a look at that work group, right now they have just finished reviewing the My Life plan, and you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. They are ensured employment is discussed with the person, and it's to be shared with the Texas Workforce Commission vocational rehabilitation counselors as needed for collaboration. The My Life plan is will add an employment application phase once our waiver policy is in place. Virtual training on that process that outlines for the Texas Workforce Commission and all others working with the supported employment placement to utilize person-centered supports and focus is in place. And they're in their final stages of reviewing a person-centered video that's being developed or was developed, and it's having voiceover for accessibility being put on. The piloting of the training process is also being developed by them. And they also have supports for individual skills and socialization that's being developed to assure compliance with the HCBS settings rule before March 17th of 2023, which you all know about. They also have a training video that was developed by a provider organization to help educate folks on the importance of the meaningful day. They're drafting a crosswalk also as a final stage of completion. And of course, they too have people with lived experience and all these other folks as part of that community in that work group. In September 30th of 2021, we developed the peer partners. You often hear peer support. You also hear of people planning together. There's lots of different names for people who are working to support one another. And we decided we need to figure out who's doing what, who's on what base, and how can we come together. And so This very diverse work group is currently putting together a peer model and identifying what different peer supports Texas is using and how to support that through a peer-to-peer support matrix. And of course, Dr. Tondura is involved as well as Dr. Croft. So I'm really excited about seeing the matrix that they will also provide to us. Next slide, please. The final work group was the framework of the My Life Plan, and it identifies how people are to receive their supports and services. How do we make sure that their plan reflects what their dreams and aspirations are? And right now, that whole plan has been submitted to information technology to be piloted as recommended by the Intellectual and Developmental Disability System Redesign Advisory Committee for implementation of acute care services and long-term service and supports as a STAR++ home and community-based services as a person-centered planning tool. Next and final slide. For more information on the video that's highlighted by NCAPPS Technical Assistance can be found at the NCAPPS website. Thank you for this opportunity. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Mary. And now we're going to go even further west and hear from Sashka Rachevich. She's a policy, this is Bevan, by the way. Sashka is a policy specialist for the Division of Services for People with Disabilities and serves as the lead for the Utah NCAPPS TA grant. In her role, she focuses on the implementation of person-centered practices, systemic change, stakeholder engagement, and compliance with the settings rule. Her background is in the field of disability advocacy with an emphasis on public policy. Sashka.
Thank you, Bevan, and thank you to Mary, Tom, and Patty for all of your phenomenal work. So as Bevan said, my name is Sashka. I am a white woman in my mid-20s with straight brown hair, brown eyes, and according to my grandmother, too many wrinkles for my age. So what can you do? I am wearing headphones and a floral top. My background is white with the logo of the Utah Division of Services for People with Disabilities, or dspd. So a little bit about dspd. We represent over 6,000 people with disabilities in the state of Utah to live self-determined lives through our home and community-based waivers. As Bevan mentioned, I am the lead for our NCAPPS Technical Assistance grant, and I am grateful for the opportunity to talk with you all today about our experience and the work that we have done so far with the assistance of NCAPPS. So next slide, please. So for context, I want to discuss what our goals are and what we have been working to achieve. So our first goal is to increase our engagement with people who use our services, and that is both in general and also specifically around person-centered practices. We believe it's very important to make sure that people in our service system are both informed and involved in the work that we're doing. Our second goal is to revise our person-centered planning standards and procedures to really embed the philosophy of person-centered thinking into our policies, our planning software, and just the way that we approach our work overall. Finally, we wanted to develop and implement a way for us to measure the experiences of people in our services and their families with the person-centered planning process. We want to make sure that people in our services make progress towards their desired life outcomes and that they lead their planning process, whatever that may look like for them, to the extent that they desire. So next slide, please. Some of the successes we have had include increased communication with stakeholders through the quarterly stakeholder meetings that we started hosting. And when I talk about our stakeholders, I mean people in our services, self-advocates, support coordinators, and service providers. The quarterly meetings serve as a way for us to communicate updates and changes to our stakeholders, and also include a dedicated time for them to ask questions and get answers. We record all of our quarterly meetings and post them to our Be Informed and Be Involved webpage, which really serves as a one-stop shop for people who want to connect with us. We have a number of different resources on that webpage to support people in having the knowledge that they need to provide input at every level. And on this webpage, we also have a list of different active work groups and committees. And one of those work groups is the stakeholder work group for the new person-centered support plan software that we have been in the process of developing for a number of years now. We decided to create new software for service plans to better align with settings rule requirements and person-centered principles and practices. The work group has been helping us in developing this new software and reviewing potential changes and suggestions. And one of the objectives that came out of the work group was the idea to create a foundational handbook for support coordinators on the person-centered planning process and the philosophy behind it. So the work group helped us create an outline of information they thought the handbook needed to include, and this idea really expanded to include other stakeholder groups. So we ended up collaborating with the Utah Parent Center on a person-centered planning handbook for parents and guardians. And we are anticipating creating a plain language manual for self-advocates and an add-on for providers that covers their role in the planning process. So next slide, please. So while we have had a number of successes, we've also faced some barriers and challenges, which is just a natural part of the process. One of the biggest challenges is that support coordinators and providers have asked us, why are we doing this? We're already person-centered. And this is really where enhanced training on best practices has been crucial and will continue to be crucial. We've had to also work on rebuilding trust between us and our stakeholders by trying to create positive relationships through our work groups and quarterly meetings, along with collaborations and partnerships with other organizations. And then as well, that increased stakeholder engagement and communication has also been crucial to trying to tackle the spread of misinformation and a lack of understanding about the way certain things work in our system. So next slide, please. So what have we learned throughout all of this? Well, first, we have learned the importance of not just gathering feedback, but closing the feedback loop. Too often we would tell our stakeholders, we want your input, and then we would gather it, and they would be left wondering what we did with that information, if anything. We learned that it's important to not just say, we hear you, but we hear you, and here is what we are going to do with what you told us. We've also learned not to underestimate the power that sometimes just simply being present can have. And we lost a little bit of this with COVID, but those smaller interactions with people before and after a meeting or at an event can really make an impact and be the start of a long-term relationship. And this has been a really crucial lesson when it comes to engaging with stakeholders. It's also really important to understand your history and how that impacts the work that you do today. So where have the breakdowns occurred? What have been the successes? And finally, the importance of patience and continued effort when it comes to creating lasting systemic change. We recognize that we have done a lot of work over the past 3 years, and we are still not done. We have started to lay a foundation, but we will need to continue to build on that moving forward because true, authentic change takes time. So, next slide, please. All of that being said, what is next for us? We are going to be developing a framework for measuring person-centered outcomes and the experiences of people in our service system with person-centered planning. We are going to be collaborating with our state intermediate care facility to see where and how we can embed the principles of person-centeredness into their practices. And using the person-centered planning handbook we mentioned before, we are going to be revamping our video core training series for support coordinators to ensure that they are trained on best practices. And really, we hope to finally officially release some of the things that we have been working on, including that handbook and our new planning software, and a whole bunch of other things that are not listed on this PowerPoint slide, like considering how we can embed person-centered practices into our intake and waitlist process. How do we ensure that we have a culturally competent system? So our work will certainly continue. So thank you to NCAPPS again, and I'll turn it over.
Great, thanks, Sashka. This is Bevan. It's time to move to the second portion of our event today. We're going to meet our two facilitators of the panel. The first is Michaela Thistle. Michaela is a person in long-term recovery and executive director at Advocacy Unlimited, Inc., a peer-run organization. She's worked in the behavioral health field as a community researcher, activist, and nonprofit administrator for nearly 15 years. Michaela, please share your reflections so far.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you to Patty from Connecticut, who shared earlier, for inviting me to join the stakeholders groups and participate in the process over the last couple of years. It's been very rewarding work because I'm actually a qualitative researcher in my background, and I've conducted many focus groups just across the state of Connecticut, where I've had a chance to connect with people who are recipients of services. And I felt as though being involved in this current project, that the group really took the time to hear from individuals from across the state who are engaged in services or who have loved ones engaged in services. And I was encouraged by what was happening. I also need to share that I am a 35-year-old white woman. I'm wearing a yellow sweater with a navy blue tank top. I've got some shiny dangly earrings, and I wear glasses. I'm smiling awkwardly because Zoom always makes me feel a little bit silly. And I have a tapestry behind me with an embroidery of kind of flowers. To continue my reflection, I was also, participating as a person with direct lived experience myself, as a recipient of mental health and addiction services. And, when I navigated mental health services, when I first got involved, and I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and inpatient, outpatient programs, that was about 15 years ago when I started my journey there. And I had no idea about person-centered planning. There was no conversation about, any sort of rights that I may have. And even though I know that the people doing the work in these settings were doing the very best that they could with the resources available, I was a bit surprised at how long we've been talking about person-centered planning and how much more work has to be done. And to get everyone oriented to the language and to the principles of person-centered practices and policies. And that came through very strongly in the focus groups. And systems work takes a ton of effort, and it's a multi-tiered process. And again, I just have to say that to any states that are applying for these dollars, like, your application and taking the time to get clear on where you're at and what are your goals for person-centered planning is worth the time. because by having that conversation with your internal team, you'll begin to get curious about where your state is. And as you do so, I would encourage you right from the get-go to include people who have direct lived experience navigating services, so you can create equitable, inclusive, and person-centered, right? A person-centered approach to the work. And I believe that that's what Connecticut did, and that's why our work was so successful. And with the technical assistance that we received, it came through, the lessons that came through the focus groups and through all of the conversations that took place, that it will be carried forward in the work and the implementation and the influence, right, of this implementation, or I'm sorry, this technical assistance period. It's already having an effect, right? It's already starting to influence the way that people do the work. So thanks so much for having me today, and I'm excited to hear more from the panel.
Great. Thank you, Michaela. This is Bevan again. Finally, we'll hear from our second facilitator, Jonas Schwartz. Jonas is Program Manager for the Vocational Rehabilitation Division at the Texas Workforce Commission. Jonas has worked for the past 25 years on public policy issues that impact people with disabilities in Texas, including employment, housing, transportation, and ensuring that Medicaid long-term services and supports are available to the people who need them. Jonas, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some reflections. To start, I am a 53-year-old white man with gray hair, brown eyes. I wear glasses. I'm wearing a beige suit with a blue shirt and a pink tie. And I'm in my my home office. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to Mary Bishop, who has been the lead for the technical assistance project that Texas has had. I've been part of that project from the beginning. And, when we started that project, the first thing we did was to take an inventory of what we're doing in terms of person-centered practices. What are the policies that we're using? What is the language that we're using? And who are the stakeholders that are most important to be at the table? And most importantly, who are those individuals with lived experience? One of the things I forgot to tell you in the description of myself is I am also a person with lived experience. I have cerebral palsy and walk with crutches and use a scooter for mobility. And so when our steering committee started, we wanted to be sure that everyone was at the table, and we have a diverse group of people, as Mary said, and we're really, we did a review of what we're doing, and we developed a common language so that everyone knew what person-centered practices is and how it's being used. And we have worked very hard over the last 3 years to ensure that person-centered practice is a common language that is discussed in every aspect of the work that we do. If we're trying to deliver a service to a person, or if we are talking with a person about what their needs, aspirations, and dreams are. What is it that they want to do? What is important to them? And how do we use all of the resources and tools at our disposal to help them engage in the best person-centered life that they can have, no matter what that is that they want to do. I really, as I was listening to what the other states have accomplished, I really noticed that there were some common themes around really working with your stakeholders, developing an understanding, developing a common feedback loop, being certain that the changes that you are making are instituted in your policy, because the way that your system finally changes is having it written down in policy, and that policy needs to very specifically state how the change is going to be operationalized. So I'm excited about all the work that the states have accomplished, and particularly excited about what we are accomplishing in Texas in that regard, and what we will continue to accomplish. I encourage states who are thinking about applying for the next round of technical assistance to do so, because what the NCAPPS Technical Assistance does is give you a framework and some really knowledgeable guides to help you through the process so that you can do the work in your state that you need to do. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Bevan. We're now in the panel portion. So Michaela and Jonas, the floor is yours, and we can, if the 4 panelists from the states could please turn on your videos as well, we'll get the discussion going.
Hello, everyone. So I'll be asking the first question. This is Michaela. So generally, systems that provide services to people with disabilities are based on a historical institutional care model that was designed based on the fundamental belief that people with disabilities are going to remain dependent on care for the rest of their lives. How have you grappled with this reality in your work on this project?
So I can go ahead and start. This is Sashka. It's a really good and also a really tough question. I think that to a certain extent, by promoting person-centered thinking within my organization, myself and others who really serve as representatives of that system, acknowledge that people with disabilities should direct their own lives in their homes and communities. And it represents a shift away from that institutional mindset. But, systemic change is tough, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I feel like I'll probably keep reiterating this all the time, is patience is really key, because, sometimes your system can feel stagnant and it's not maybe moving as fast as you want it to, or, there's just some different issues around that. So for me, it's been really important to remind myself where the system started, acknowledge where it is now, and continue to work to push the system to be better for the people we support. And, I also think continuing our efforts to engage people with disabilities to better understand what they want from our service system. And I really believe that the hope is that if we can get people to truly start putting the person at the center and support them in integrating in their communities, that person-centered system almost seems like it comes pretty naturally then.
Thank you. This is Mary Bishop again. I just have had my focus a little bit differently. I think it's difficult to help people and their families see the value of a person who has a disability working when they are not offered a living wage and benefits that cover their costs for health care, attendant care, home modifications, therapies, etc. Until the system can address the needs to pay a living wage and offer all people equal access to health care by changing the policies at both the federal and state levels, it is a challenge for people to not be dependent on the person's need to maintain their Medicaid benefits. There are people who I know who have degrees, even working on doctoral degrees, but cannot find work that can afford them the supports they need to end their reliance on a system to simply help them get in and out of the bed every day. The struggles are real and personal for many, and the community forum should be held within our many stakeholders so they can truly tell us what they need to help change policies. It's also important for us that we continue to work to help with our leadership buy-in, and we're working desperately to make that happen with the assistance of the National Center for Advancement of Person-Centered Practices. Thank you.
This is Tom. I'm not real sure what order we're supposed to go in, but that's a really painful question. We've become very aware of, in spite of all of our talk about wanting to be person-centered in the direct practice, our system is very provider-centered. 90% of what we do is based on contracts and budgets and money and data and outcomes. And I think Mary put in her thing about papers, you know, and shifting from that to developing an infrastructure that supports the work of person-centered services. That one's a tough one. And we've really struggled with that, and probably will struggle with it a while longer. So, and this is Tom, I'm sorry, thank you.
This is Patty from Connecticut. I would agree with what everyone has said. I firmly believe that until individuals that are receiving services are better informed of their rights and are better educated about their what they should be expecting from the system, that we will continue to struggle. I know part of what our effort has been in Connecticut is to, and what is concerning, I guess, is despite all of the training that we've provided when we had our listening sessions, the vast majority of people that we asked the question, what did you know about, or what should you be expected in person-centered planning, was very little knowledge. So I think the key for me is, in addition to some of the other system work, is to ensure that the individuals receiving services are getting as much information and as many tools as possible so that they can provide feedback to the system of what it may be missing and what needs to be occurring in order for system change to actually be occurring. It's you know, I do agree that it tends to be service connected, and I also think for our state we've tried to include person-centered thinking not just for those that are receiving paid services, but for individuals that are receiving help from senior centers or from you know, other non-Medicaid related services in educational settings, in the Department of Labor, other systems that are providing supports to individuals that might not be paid through the Medicaid system. So as there's more of a recognition that all of the individuals within our state, regardless of what the situation is, that they all deserve to have a assistance in making sure that they have what they need to have the best life possible. So it can be frustrating sometimes, but I think that it is, you know, I think it's a work in progress, and hopefully, I think we've made improvements over time. Hopefully that we will continue to do so.
Thank you. This is Jonas. The next question. What was your most successful strategy for engaging people who use services? And we'll start with Mary.
Thank you, Jonas. This is Mary Bishop again. You know, I think it's the repeated ask. You have to really rely on your own networks to identify people with lived experience to participate in all of the planning. I read in a chat, nothing about us without us. That was already in my scripted answers and responses, because we can't be the decision makers on other people's lives. We need to empower each and every one of them. And so when I think of the 7 work groups and the strategic plan, we have to have those people there. And one of the things that I was really going to suggest was that you have one of those folks who has lived experience as part of your your co-chair, your co-host, whatever you want to call it. And then it dawned on me, every one of the 7 work groups, co-leaders, co-chairs, all have lived experience. So I'm humbled by that and recommend you consider the same. Thank you.
Tom.
This is Tom, and I don't want to be too controversial about this, but it's what I do. I think that one of the difficult, well, let me back up. One of the problems that our networks run into is we tend to look at persons with lived experiences as someone other than us. And in the aging network, we are all persons with lived experience. We are all aging. And so for my network, the real issue is the network such that I would want to participate in it? Would I want to receive services from it? And the other piece I will say to that is there's, in my brain, there's a difference between including and involving. Okay. And having people with lived experience on, in groups, it looks really good on paper, but the real key to me is the extent to which we are involving each other in the work and accepting each other as partners in the work, understanding that each of us brings different perspectives, different experiences with the network to the table, and that's where you really get the benefit. So, thank you.
Patty.
This is Patty from Connecticut. I think our most successful strategy was identifying already existing groups that we knew that had people with lived experience, especially those that were already meeting together where it was their own group and we were asking to participate or to ask to reach out to them. I also think state agencies that knew of individuals that are being paid as peer supports, that was really good because they were often already connected with a lot of individuals of getting connected. I also think it's very important when engaging with individuals with lived experience that you make sure that what you're asking for them is that you make it as accessible as possible, so that's inclusive of getting, and what I heard very clearly, and it's another question that comes up later, is individuals are asking for materials well ahead of time so they could review the content, so they could be much more informed and be prepared to be able to participate fully in conversations. So getting content ahead of time, a week or 2 weeks, hopefully ahead of time in plain language, making any accessible options available so that people with various needs can participate fully. So I think having that feature, I think, is important in making sure that people are heard when they are asking for any kind of special considerations to make sure they're fully involved, I think is helpful. But I do think there are state agencies, and there are many in our agency that, I mean, our state that hire individuals that are peer support. So that group there, I think, is really key. They tend to change a lot. I do find, you know, some that are hired for a short period of time. So you really have to make sure you're staying in connection with them to make sure that you're not losing their contact information. But that would be what I would suggest.
Oscar?
Yeah, so I think some of our most successful strategies are similar to what Patty described. So we kind of started out with an asset map. And what that means is really looking at other organizations who are engaging with self-advocates, people with lived experience who are using our services. And I think Bevan actually put the best practice guide for engaging people who receive services in the chat. We've definitely referred back to that many times, you know, the concept of getting things out in advance and making things plain language and accessible has been really important in that engagement work. I think one of the greatest partnerships that we found kind of through that exploration of the asset map was our State Developmental Disabilities Council. They are very focused on building a strong network of self-advocates, and we have had the most success building off of that foundation that they've already been working to create. Along with that, I actually also just took over as my organization's representative on the DD Council and have been able to meet self-advocates through there. And I think that just reiterated how important it is to be in spaces where people who use services are present and really connecting with them, not just on a professional, you know, tell me what you want out of the service system level, but on a human level, you know, what do you like to do? What are your interests? And connecting that way.
Thank you.
The next question, this is Michaela. The next question is, looking back, what would you have done differently? And what advice do you have for the next cohort? We'll start with Tom.
To be honest with you, I'm not sure we would have done a whole lot differently than we did. We had a really good network in place. And I think one of the keys to our success was not only did we have a network in place, but the partners in that network, we've been working together and we trust each other. So we could have difficult conversations without, you know, having to put a pretty hat on the things. And I think that's real important, that trust among partners that we didn't have to spend time building because we already had that. And what was the second part of the question? Oh, the advice for new grantees.
Yes.
I would say one of the real benefits for us was relying on the technical assistance team. We were very fortunate that Terry and Val were our technical assistance leads, and the support and the guidance and the direction and just the knowledge that they had really helped us focus. I think it was just critical to our success. Going back to the first question, I think we may have taken stronger advantage of the TA probably a lot sooner. There was a little bit of who are these people and what are they doing, and that. But I really would encourage future grantees to really rely heavily and quickly on the technical assistance teams.
Thanks, Tom. We'll hear from Patty now.
I would have to totally agree with what Tom said. I think because we were the first states that were requesting assistance, I think there was uncertainty of really where our role as the core team and the technical assistance, where that came in, and what should we be expecting. So I think maybe having a very early on conversation in meeting and becoming more aware of really what the technical assistance expert, subject matter expert can do to assist with the process, I think would be helpful. I think it was clear to understand the role of the stakeholder, what I call is our stakeholder group, which is our individuals with lived experience that we're meeting with. But I think it was a little harder. And I think, I agree with Tom that I think we struggled a little bit for the first year, not realizing really the value of, or what we could ask of our subject matter experts, although I think they were willing to provide that. I also think that it was more time than I anticipated. And I think I would sit down in the beginning and really ask for every member to be equal participants and try to get a commitment right from the outset from your core team, so that it's not so that everyone is fully engaged and it's clear what everybody's responsibilities are. So I think that would be a little bit more helpful. We had a large number of core members and I would say if you do that, which I think we had to do in our state, developing more subcommittees and being really clear on what the goals of each of the subcommittee, it would be helpful. We started doing that in our second and third year, but it would have been helpful to do that right from the outset.
Great, thank you. This is Michaela, and we'll now hear from Sashka.
I too would like to reiterate everything that Tom and Patty have already brought up. And, I think that in terms of what we would have done differently is ensuring that we had that infrastructure straight out of the gate to truly make systemic change happen. In terms of advice too, I'm just going to reiterate the message of patience, to have patience with yourself, others, your system. There are really rough days, but also really wonderful days. So, take the bad with the good and keep going is my motivational message here. And I also think identifying external partners who are passionate about this work can really assist you. And it's very critical. I noticed that there was some discussion in the chat about non-governmental partners. We were really fortunate to work with the delightful Lisa Wade. I'm going to give her a shout out at the Utah Parent Center. And then also some folks from our Center for Persons with Disabilities. And, they in their work are constantly looking at how they can promote person-centered practices in what they do, just in our general community. So that support is really invaluable, and I encourage you to utilize it.
This is Michaela, and we will hear from Mary now.
Hi, this is Mary. Thank you again. So we were in the chute. That whole thing, the bull, the calf, whatever you want to be in that chute, even the horse, we were all there ready to go.
Looks like, Mary, it looks like you just froze. This is Bevan. Perhaps we could, this is Bevan, perhaps we could give Mary a moment and circle back.
Sure, would you like to move on to the next question, Jonas?
Yes, this is Jonas. Looking ahead, what did you learn and what will you carry forward? And we'll start this question with Patty.
We're continuing all of the work that we're doing. As I indicated, we have a lot of lessons learned from our listening sessions. We still are engaging in and have a lot of work to do with quality metrics and determining indicators of whether or not all of the work that we're doing is really demonstrating that the services people are receiving, or the types of that the planning that they're receiving is person-centered. But there are also things that need to happen across the whole system. I would love to see materials across the board reviewed and developed with support from people with lived experience to make sure that content is understandable, is culturally appropriate, that the content indicates what it needs to be. I think until we get continued, and I know that one of the other states had done some of this work already, but I think there are across the board of looking at all areas of where you can be, your system can be more person-centered, inclusive of, I think, having priority setting on on a governor's end of things, where our state, it does not have an umbrella agency where all the state agencies are underneath, so they kind of exist in they have commissioners that make decisions, unlike some other state agencies where if the decisions are made that you're going to put this as a priority, all other states follow that. I think there's a need to prioritize this and would love to see that happening. I'm in other webinars that we've heard regarding some of this work, some of the states that were the most successful that I was hearing is when there was requirement to do that because of lawsuits, unfortunately. So I do think having on a leadership level of the state, having that as a priority does make it easier to ensure that staff have time devoted to continuing to work on this and not have it as being kind of a separate initiative that in the absence of someone being passionate of doing this on their other time of their schedule, that they continue the work. So I think we will continue improving our systems. Our state has been kind of advanced in our work already, and I think we'll continue to strive to improve as much as possible.
Hi, Jonas. This is Michaela. I noticed that Mary has joined us again, and I'd like to give Mary an opportunity to respond to the last question. So welcome back, Mary.
Thank you. I apologize. I guess I timed out. Anyway, I think that we have to remember a couple of things. I think we have to remember that people with lived experience are no different than we are. It's really about how are they like us, not different from us, and how we have to have them at the table with us, which has already been mentioned. But at the same time, it's really about no one person can do this by themselves. This has to be a global adventure so that we can make the changes that people so desire, so deserve to have positive control of their lives, and have the people in the ivory towers listening and learning. Otherwise, we're never going to get people to move forward with their lives and be in control of their lives. So I do encourage you to meet at their convenience also, not at the convenience of staff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. So this is Jonas, back to our last question. Looking ahead, what did you learn that you will carry forward? Sashka.
Yes, thank you. I'll try and keep this short because I know we're closing in on time. I'd just like to reiterate how crucial stakeholder engagement and trust is when it comes to systemic change, and how important it is to make sure that people understand the why of what we're doing. and just acknowledging that person-centeredness is an ongoing evolution and process that will just continue on, you know, beyond the people on this call today and beyond everyone else. So thank you.
Mhm.
And Tom.
I would agree this thing about patience. It just occurred to me that, you know, if we were really person-centered, we would include it. We would be including folks in the design of our programs rather than just doing customer satisfaction and saying we're interested in what people think. So, you know, looking forward, it's like finding this balance of where do I push the system and where do I kind of relax and wait for openings in the system to do things that need to be done. It's really like a sweater. When I start pulling the threads, the whole sweater unravels, and I have to be prepared for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And Mary.
I already answered it a few minutes ago, but thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for your wisdom, for your reflections. Thank you to Michaela and Jonas for facilitating this conversation, and to Sashka, Mary, Tom, and Patricia for being really honest and open about your experiences leading these challenging but important systems change efforts. We are honored to be supporting you in this work. We are wrapping up, and I want to say just a couple of things. If folks have one more minute to stay, please download the technical assistance application. Connor, if you could put it in the chat one more time. There is guidance after the application form itself. It is a short application form. The advice that you've received on what constitutes a successful technical assistance effort is going to come in very handy. One piece that we didn't touch on a lot in this discussion, but that I want to highlight, is that we are deeply committed at NCAPPS to ensuring and upholding equity in person-centered practices. And you'll see that in the guidance for the technical assistance. That's been strengthened since our last round. We're really interested in ensuring that, for example, when we're partnering with stakeholders, that we're not just partnering with the usual stakeholders who show up, but that we're really taking a look at who's showing up to the table and who is not at the table. And you need to think about that in terms of disability identity, race, culture, language spoken. How can we make things even more accessible in an equitable way? So please do be thinking about equity as you apply for NCAPPS Technical Assistance. It's going to come up again and again because it's important. One other important note is that we have 15 states, and you've heard from state employees in the first cohort of technical assistance, but our technical assistance is also open to tribal governments and to territories. So if there are folks here from tribes, from territories, please apply. Please encourage your contacts in tribes and territories to apply. We would very much be excited to work with tribal governments and with folks in territories to advance person-centered principles within those systems. Once again, big props to our panelists, and thank you to the hundreds of folks who tuned in today. We're glad that you were here, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Take care.